This is not a video that I wanted to make, but with the number of concerned comments that I received on my last video and people all around the world messaging me, I thought that I better.
This wholesale food market is China's newest epicenter.
China has locked down at least 29 communities, and Beijing officials have warned that they expect the number of confirmed cases to rise.
So, how did we get here? Well, first, let's recap a little bit. Back in January was the first time that we went into lockdown. And for the first few months, all eyes were on China.
Chinese officials say the coronavirus outbreak has now killed more than...
Even once things started to get back to some kind of normal, I sensed that my friends and family, and presumably a lot of people around the world, were monitoring the situation in China to get a sense of what life would be like after lockdown. And certainly a few weeks ago, when I was able to travel for the first time and we went to Shanghai, I had an overwhelming response on my social media posts about it. So it really is no wonder that after Beijing has been hit by this second wave, after months of zero cases, that everybody is looking to see what's going to happen next.
The world is watching Beijing.
This is clearly a massive news story around the world, which means there's a lot of media noise to cut through. Now, I'm no journalist, but I do live here in Beijing. So I will try my best to paint a picture of the latest developments in what is likely to be an ever-changing story. To prepare for this video, I spoke to some people around the city, and I'll take you out to my neighborhood to show you what the situation on the streets is like. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's go over what we already know. Roughly about 10 days ago, there was a string of cases that were found in the southwest of Beijing in an area called Fengtai. The cases were linked to a market called Xinfadi. Most of the people who have tested positive have had some relation to this market. The concerning fact is this market actually supplies shops, restaurants, and individuals all across the city. So if anybody has been to this market, then they must quarantine for 14 days. This is the case for somebody that Jack knows. Their husband went to the market last weekend, so now the whole family has to quarantine again. The official explanation of this recent outbreak is imported salmon. But I'm no scientist, so in today's video, let's focus on the social effects that this outbreak is going to have. It's been over 2 months since the last COVID case was reported here in Beijing, so naturally this is going to have a demoralizing effect on the city. But I also think that people know the drill now, so the routine of life during an epidemic has been quick to return. Which leads me on to one of the questions I've been asked most over the past week, which is, are you back in lockdown? Well, that depends on how you define lockdown. As you can see, I'm free to leave my house, I can go about my daily life, but to the outside observer, things are far from normal. Everywhere I go, there are temperature checks and also health app checks in place. So every shop, restaurant, even to get into my work building, all have these measures. Once again, all non-essential travel outside the city is strictly forbidden, and COVID tests and quarantine are mandatory if you do so. The temperature check volunteers are back again, but actually they only stopped taking people's temperature and checking ID cards like a week before this happened. So they're already back in action, bless them. Yesterday, I went to my local fruit and veg shop to stock up for the weekend, and for the first time since February, since this epidemic started, the shelves were looking a little bit bare. Now, hopefully this is just a temporary supply chain issue, because 70% of the produce sold here in Beijing actually comes from that market that's been shut down. So you might remember this coffee shop from my original video. Well, by the looks of it, things are still going strong for them. This is the main road near where I live, and as you can see, there are lots of shops and restaurants still open, there are lots of people on the streets, and there's still lots of traffic. Since since February, these precautions have been pretty much daily life for us here in Beijing. It wasn't until the beginning of June that things started to ease off just a little bit. So really, things don't feel that different to me. Right now, it seems like a balanced approach that is prioritizing safety without jeopardizing economic activity. That is because Beijing is a city of 22 million people. Where I'm living is deemed as a low-risk area, but what about the areas that are closer to the outbreak? I've read reports that the neighborhoods close to the area have been put under quarantine. I've also read that close to 1 million people have been mass tested for this. I'm sure you've seen the videos circulating on social media with the long lines of people waiting to get tested. Now, obviously, I can't travel to the worst affected areas to show you exactly what it's like, but the beauty of living in the 21st century means I can use one of these to contact some of my contacts and ask them what it's like closer to that area. So I spoke to somebody who lives in Fengtai, somebody who lives in Dashing, and someone who lives in Heilian, which all surround this area that recent outbreak has happened in. And they all told me a similar sort of thing, that you need temperature checks and IDs to get into your compound, which you already did before. The measures are a little bit more stricter, but the shops are open, they're not quarantined, their work hasn't really been affected because they can go back to working online really easily, and they haven't received COVID tests yet. Their experience seems pretty similar to my own. I even spoke to somebody who had been tested for COVID-19 to see if his was any different. And apart from the test, he said exactly the same, that he wasn't under quarantine, everywhere was still open. But obviously he hasn't had his results back yet, so, he might be put under quarantine soon. But he did share with me his experience, and this is what he said to me. The test was pretty horrible, just because there were lots of people and there wasn't that much help for foreigners. Also, it was the most likely situation that he's been in to catch the virus because there was no social distancing measures and a mass gathering of people, which, although I think the testing is a great idea, I do agree with him because if there's no social distancing measures in place, then it kind of seems counterproductive. In much of the same way that Wuhan was locked off for the good of the country, it seems that this area seems to be doing its part to keep the city safe. But that's not to say that the rest of the city hasn't been affected at all. Actually, in some districts such as Sanlitun, which is predominantly bars and restaurants, all of them have been closed to undergo a mass testing of all of the staff. And it was announced today that all delivery drivers across the city will undergo the same mass testing in this next week. One of my Chinese friends who works in the F&B industry shared these photos with me. The schools have all been shut again, and the kids and teachers are back to teaching online. Although it's not mandatory for companies to work from home, they've been encouraged to do so from the government. And judging from the metro and the roads this past week, it seems that a lot of companies have followed this advice. And as of yesterday, I'm in exactly the same boat, and I'll be working from home from now on. So it'll just be me, my laptop, and my pajamas for the next few weeks. In all seriousness though, there is no way of knowing what is going to happen next. But we do know that in the coming weeks, it's going to be critical, not just for China, but also for observers around the world wanting to see what is going to happen with this second wave. Personally, the fact that China does take these things so seriously fills me with confidence that they're doing as much as possible to stop this. Finally, I just want to say thank you to everybody who got in touch to ask if I was okay. I really appreciate it. This is such a contrast to our last video, which obviously was about traveling in China, and obviously now we can't. And I was really looking forward to having a somewhat normal summer, but the main thing is that we are both okay. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, give me a big thumbs up. If you live in Beijing, then make sure you leave me a comment to let me know what it's like for you here in the city. And if you want to stay up to date with what I'm doing, then make sure you also follow me on Instagram at WeAreNico. If you don't already subscribe to this channel, then hit that subscribe button and the bell notification to stay up to date with all of my related content. I'll see you next time.